Good evening, everybody. This is a meeting of the Council held in public. It is not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room and proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it is safe to return, councillors will receive a text message. Officers will also advise when it is safe to return to the meeting. We are recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the Council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Okay. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Emma?
Thank you, Chairman. An apology received from Councillor Green with Councillor Smith as substitute, and also apologies from Councillors Allen, Aldridge and Turner. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest?
Well, ticket.
Yeah. Moving on. Agenda item 3, minutes. Confirmation of the minutes of the Licensing Committee held on the 9th of July 2024. Could I take that in the room? Yep, there's meetings, minutes agreed.
Yeah, take a vote on that one.
So yeah, well, for the formality, a vote for, yeah, let me try an accurate record. Lovely. No, abstentions? Yeah, one.
Thank you.
Lovely. Agenda item 4, minutes of subcommittees. To note the minutes of the miscellaneous licensing subcommittee meeting held on the 14th of August 2024, and to also note the minutes of the Licensing Act 2003 subcommittee meeting held on the 27th of June 2024.
Yeah.
And yeah, those minutes are just for noting. Right. On to agenda item 5, review of Council Statement of Licensing Policy, Gambling Act 2005 post-consultation. And I'll hand over to Alex to present her report.
Thank you very much, Chair. So at the Licensing Committee meeting on the 9th of July 2024, members approved the commencement of consultation on the draft Statement of Licensing Policy for Gambling, which is shown as enclosure number 1. This consultation was undertaken between the 22nd of July 2024 and the 2nd of September 2024. And this report provides a feedback on the outcome of that consultation with a view to seeking member endorsement of the final policy. So just a quick background. Basildon Council as a licensing authority is legally required to develop, consult on and publish a statement of licensing policy, which looks at the promotion of the licensing objectives, which are namely preventing gambling from being a source of crime and disorder associated with crime and disorder or being used in support of crime, ensure that gambling is conducted in a fair and open way, and protecting children and other vulnerable persons being harmed or exploited by gambling. This policy must be published every 3 years, although the statement can be reviewed on an annual basis and updated prior to the expiry of 3 years. The current Statement of Licensing Policy for Gambling was published on the 31st of January 2022, and the revised policy is therefore in turn needed to be published by the 31st of January 2025. As we spoke about before, the government has introduced a gambling white paper back in April 23, and the government is setting out plans for modernising the regulation of the gambling sector. Once this review is concluded, there will be likely changes to the Gambling Commission's guidance, which is issued to the licensing authorities, which will in turn have an impact on the gambling policy. So this is why this time round we've done a light touch on the gambling policy. We've changed the dates and the census numbers, and that's all we've done for it. And that's following advice for what the Gambling Commission has told us to do. We are still awaiting, there is no timeline. Obviously following the recent general election, there still isn't a timeline. There's a new minister in post, so we're just waiting to see what the steer may be from the new government on this white paper. So as soon as we've got an updated guidance, I can update yourselves at a following committee, and then we intend on doing a full review of the licensing policy in accordance with those new guidelines. So it's likely to be 25, 26 is when we're looking for that. So the consultation, as I said, went from the 22nd of July to the 2nd of September, and it followed the consultation strategy, which is shown as enclosure number 2. There were 2 responses by way of the online survey, and they're shown as enclosure number 4, and 1 response from Goschalk solicitors on behalf of the Betting and Gambling Council by letter, and that is shown by enclosure number 5. The responses to these consultation comments have been compiled, and they're shown as enclosure number 6. The survey showed from the responses that they either agreed or were neutral to the questions. 1 response from the online survey added a view regarding the disclosure and barring checks, and that has been responded to. And the letter submitted in the consultation covered a number of areas, including information about the national review. And again, the comments and responses are shown as enclosure number 6. But the outcome recommendation by the officer is that there's no change to the draft policy currently. I can go through those quick questions in enclosure number 6 for yourselves and do a brief overview. So in regards to the DBS checks, they asked the question, it doesn't distinguish between a basic, standard and enhanced check, and asked whether we should look at what type of DBS, level of DBS we should be requesting. Again, this is an expectation that the applicant has written policies and procedures in place for safeguarding and child protection. And where the policy mentioned DBS, this is an example of what may be considered by the applicant to form part of their policies and procedures. Each applicant's policies and procedures are considered on their merits, and it's up to the applicant to show what measures they've put in place that are sufficient for that application for that particular premises. As with all the questions, whilst we're still awaiting the change from the guidance from the Gambling Commission, and there may be more of a steer on what type of DBS level they may require in the future, I recommend leaving this paragraph as it is and look to revisit this once the new guidance has been published. So I pulled 3 comments from the letter. First comment was regarding 18.5, with a list of factors that the council expects to be considered when conducting a local risk assessment, and they were particularly interested in the suggestions of area of depravity and ethnic profile of the residents. So again, the Gambling Commission's guidance for the licensing authorities under local risk assessment states that the licensing conditions and code of practice formalise the need for operators to consider local risks. This social responsibility code requires licensees to assess the local risks to the licensing objectives at each of their premises, and in undertaking their assessment they must take into account relevant matters identified in the licensing authority's policy statement. So the Commission does not seek to define a vulnerable person, but it does, for regulatory purposes, assume that this group includes people who gamble more than that they want to, people who gamble beyond their means, and people who may not be able to make informed or balanced decisions about gambling. Again, the UK has one of the biggest gambling markets in the world, generating a profit of 14.2 billion, and this came from the source of Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And the prevalence is among people with poor health, low life satisfaction and well-being, and this is particularly true where there's an indication of psychological health problems as well. So the guidance states that licensing authorities need to consider in relation any specific considerations that apply in relation to the protection of vulnerable persons. And this could be a local risk that is reflected in the local authority's policy statement. So again, the gambling policy expects the operators to look at a local risk assessment and consider the area in relation to all the licensing objectives, which involves crime as well as vulnerability. So in relation to the ethnic profile, the comment was in relation to ethnic profile and crime. That's not why that ethnic profile is in there. We're looking at the possibility of the need for having leaflets and information in another language or other languages that may be appropriate for that area. But again, that's for the operator in that area to assess. So the comments seem to assume that the bullet points interchange with each other, or that the inclusion suggests premeditation, and this is not the case. The ask is that the factors to be assessed and that licensing authorities the view that this accords with the licensing objectives. So again, whilst we're awaiting the change to the guidance from the Gambling Commission, we recommend that we leave the paragraph as it is and revisit it once the new guidance has been published. Similarly, the safeguarding and vulnerable persons, it talks about licence holders to be aware of the risks and proactively manage the permissions to minimise those risks, and states that the codes of practice is the issue for the operating licence and therefore the Gambling Commission. But under section 349 of the Act, it requires all licensing authorities to prepare and publish a statement of licensing principles that they propose to apply in exercising their functions under the Act, and this is commonly known as the policy statement. And the statement forms the licensing authority's mandate for managing local gambling provisions and set out how the licensing authority views the local risk environment and therefore its expectations in relation to the operators within the locality. So under the section of guidance for codes of practice, the Act requires the licensing authority in exercising their function to have regard to any codes of practice issued by the Commission. And again, the licensing objectives, the main one of the licensing objectives is the protection of children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. So under this section, the licensing authority is exercising its function having regard to the Gambling Commission's codes of practice, as well as the licensing objectives. So again, the recommendation is to leave the paragraph as it is until we come and do a more thorough review should the guidance change on that. And finally, the staffing levels, the last question in relation to staffing levels. Similar with the responses above, within the guidance to the licensing authority, it states that in exercising their powers under section 153, licensing authorities should consider whether staff will be able to adequately supervise the gambling premises, as adequate staffing levels is a factor considered regarding the prevention of underage gambling. The Commission would expect the operator and the licensing authority to work together to consider how any impediments to the supervision of the premises might be most appropriately remedied. And again, each application is considered on its own merit, and the operator's own policies and procedures and local risk assessments are considered as part of the application measures to uphold the licensing objectives. So, the recommendations are that the members consider the outcome of the consultation and agree any amendments to the policy proposed, and that the recommendation be put forward to Council in November 24, and that the revised statement of licensing policy for gambling comes into effect by the 31st of January 2025 in accordance with the proposed timetable shown as enclosure number 4. It's the end.
Thank you for that, Alex. A very considered and thorough report. Very insightful, thank you. Are there any questions for the officer? I'll count first, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chairman. Alex, I welcome the report. Obviously, it's a light touch. Can't believe that, is it 3 years since the last time we looked at this? Do we have any idea what is on the radar of the white paper?
Yes, so I did go to a recent forum with the Gambling Commission, and there are some things that are being muted around. One of them particularly was previously it's been banned for people to use debit cards on the machines. They're now looking to lift that ban and to add additional safety measures such as set breaks between gambling, but those breaks are looking to be around about 30 seconds long, and during those breaks they'll be showing messages of safer gambling and other things like that. So there are some changes coming, but currently there is a new government, there is a new gambling minister, and whilst they're being trained up on that and understanding what the white paper was originally doing, there may be some changes to what's originally been muted around. So at the moment in time, it's not very clear, so that's why I'm kind of proposing not to change anything until we see where we go from the future. What I would suggest is that should they go out to consultation again, that maybe I bring the consultation questions back to committee members. So we may have to call a committee or pass around questions so that maybe you can have an input on some of those questions that we may go back to as an authority. Because I remember, Councillor Westwick, you had a good comment in relation to the machines within pubs and about turning those off, where we can't condition those permits, so we can't condition them. There could be some work, and it's been reflected back to the commission. So should there be another consultation, it may be worthwhile to come back to yourselves to look at those questions, and then take those back to the commission. But at the moment in time, there's no real clear steer because of the change of government, but it is due for review.
Any follow-up questions, Councillor? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I said before this meeting started about members nitpicking many moons ago of licensing committee agendas. I've just fallen foul of it, page 43, for the sweet and simple reason I wouldn't want people to think we're Republicans here. It says Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. I say no more on that point. Second point, it's good that you're making reference about the schools. I've had declared up my county councillor. Now they've only got 7 trading standards officers. They're the ones who normally go around trying to pinch people selling reasonably priced cigarettes. Are they the ones going around enforcing the Licensing Act in gambling to make sure that betting bookies are following the rules, or do we employ our own people?
So there's two parts to that. So we the Gambling Commission also look at enforcement in relation to betting shops. So they did close one down during within our area during just around COVID time. The operator's licence was removed because of online betting when they weren't licensed for online betting. So there are, the Gambling Commission do move in there. We do go around and do inspections, and we will investigate into those within our remit of enforcement. We are, when we go out and do evening visits on pubs, our next lot is also looking at the slot machines that are inside licensed premises as well, and we'll be looking at where they're sited, where the members of the bar team have got sight of them, if they're observing what's going on, and if we can speak to them as to and ask the questions what they would do if there was somebody underage. It's slightly more difficult if we're looking at underage within within a licensed premises, within a pub or anything else like that, because that does fall within trading standards sort of remit. So they normally work on intelligence led. So if there are issues, we can feed that back, but we can still do some tests on our end as well. So we do that, and that's what we'll be looking forward through as well.
Councillor Smith.
From my experience with trading standards, they work on their own pace. Members will recall the previous operator of the Westgate car park, and they pinched a resident who from this borough works for another authority's trading standards, and he was saying, this is what your trading standards should be doing. And I went, I'll feed that all back to Essex, but they don't care, it's Basildon. I fed that back and got the excuse that they're overpressed and overworked. But during the lockdown, he was terrorising the shop selling vapes. And what I understand was they had a friend who had a friend who was supporting a corner shop over this guy who had this vape shop in town. So they've got a bad habit of not coming down regular enough. What tabs have we got on trading standards until we get unitary status? We need to know they're coming round into Basildon, and not because Mrs Bouquet of somewhere posh in Epping's phoned up and gone, oh, I've seen some children buying matches.
So we don't have tabs. It's not within our remit to keep tabs on trading standards. We do work with them. So if we have got across all kinds of licensing, so if we have got anything that we can talk to them and do a joint enforcement with, then we will, if that's availability there. So I can't really comment on trading standards and Essex County Council at this time. However, just to let you know, in relation to test purchases, the operators also, some of the larger operators, and it's soon going to look at smaller operators as well, have to have a third-party test purchasing. So they will have third-party test purchases coming in, and they have to report those back to the local authority and to the Gambling Commission. So we do get reports back from some of our larger ones. So things like Ladbrokes and things where they go and do third-party test purchases, the results do come back to us.
Is it possible, Mr Chairman, that some report is brought to either this committee or the most relevant scrutiny committee, just listing in the last 12 months how many visits from trading standards have been to such premises and possibly other premises that are pertinent to the relevant committee, and maybe asking them to come down here, because they are a very rare breed, trading standards in Basildon. Very rare breed.
Thank you for your suggestion, Councillor Smith. I think that's perhaps something for me to take away with the officers to discuss. Which committee of this council is probably best placed to facilitate that discussion? Perhaps if it's using the powers that lie with the scrutiny committees to kind of have trading standards here, or perhaps an update report anyway for members of the licensing committee to consider. But I think that's certainly something to take away and work on offline. But no, thanks, Councillor Smith. We'll take that away. Lovely. So, are there any further questions to the officer or comments on the report from any of the committee members? No. And I think with that, before we go to the vote, just to reiterate, I think Councillor Lawrence is absolutely right in noting the light touch nature of the review, and I think many other local authorities are in the same boat as us. When it comes to this issue, knowing that a full and thorough review of the policy will take place, but we're waiting on the new guidance to be issued. But in the meantime, we do have to meet our statutory responsibility to have this policy reviewed and renewed and in place by the end of January next year. I think also want to praise the officers for carefully considering the consultation responses that have come in, and also conducting the consultation in a thorough and meaningful way as well. And I note the consultation responses, one being positive, one being neutral. So I don't think we received one negative consultation response. But I think it's well worth praising the officers for all the hard work they've done behind the scenes on this, and the review of the, albeit light touch, the review of the policy. And reading through particularly on enclosure number 6. The responses that or the consultation response we've received, I think the way in which the officers have considered those responses, I think, has been very thorough, robust, and rightly grounded in the guidance and the licensing objectives. So I think with that, unless there are no further comments, we'll go to the vote. And I think if members are happy, we'll take both recommendations as one. So I think, just to read out the recommendations, again, I know Alex did it, but just before we go to the vote. So the recommendations being, number 1, that members consider the outcome of the consultation and agree any amendments to the policy proposed. And number 2, a recommendation be put forward to full council in November 2024 that the revised statement of licensing policy, gambling, come into effect by the 31st of January 2025, in accordance with the proposed timetable shown as enclosure number 4. So all those in favour of the recommendations? Lovely. That is unanimous. Thank you. So with that concludes the final agenda item for this evening and the end of business for tonight. So I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody, and a safe journey home.